That was worth quickly stopping for. The Vale's looking particularly stunning today. Look at that. Gorgeous. Everything's in order. All happy. Shirley's laying an egg. Right, let's get to Grimsditch. Right, I'm in the village of Great Hampton, just outside Berkhamsted. Now this is where I've come to see a bit of Grimsditch. It's not the closest bit of Grimsditch to where I live, but it's the bit where you can actually see something going on. I'll just show you on the map. Right, now we are currently here, Wigington. Now when we finish here, I'm gonna walk along this bit, and when I've done here, I'm gonna make my way over to the woods here, on the way to Wendover. That's also where I went last time, and it's quite impressive there. The Grimsditch there really does look like quite a structure. And then I'm going to make my way down to here, where I've never ever been in my life. But if you look, for some strange reason, Grimsditch here is at a right angle, which has piqued my interest. You don't see much Grimsditch looking like that. That's down towards Great Missenden, a place called Great Hampton. Right, we've got a few miles to cover today, so let's get over to the field and I'll show you the first bit. Well, here we are, just over here. That hedge line there, that runs all the way down with the trees in the distance. That's our first bit of Grimsditch. Let's go and have a look. This first bit we've got along here, I'm not quite sure why it's levelled out the way it has. It might have always been like that. I mean, some parts of Grimsditch are quite high banks and deep ditches. Whereas here we've got a bit of a bank which is all overgrown with this gorse. It's all full of gorse, and there's brambles in there too. But there is a very distinct difference in the land on this side and the land on that side. That's a lot lower. So I'm going to hazard a guess that the ditch was probably on the other side, on the lower bit. That's how it'd normally go. But you never know with Grimsditch. You'd think, obviously, if it was defensive, that you'd have the ditch on the lower side and the bank on the higher side. But nobody even knows if it was defensive. Got a new stick. I made myself a new stick. It's an old bit of it's cherry wood, and it's got a bit of sentimental value because when I used to live down in East London for a bit, I did all my walking in Epping Forest, and before I moved back home, I went and cut this from Epping Forest. Sorry, found it. That's been drying out for about 6 years, so well and truly ready to go. I just sanded it all down and gave it a wax. It's straight enough to not have to bother with straightening it. Put a loop on it. Got a 10mm bolt glued into the bottom as a bit of a stop, an end to it. And there's a little arrow in the top. Now that's crucial. That's a little invention of mine I'm hoping to get rich off of one day. All you have to do, when you start walking, make sure that the arrow's pointing in front of you, and that way, you know you're always going forwards. Right, we've got a little bit of a gap coming up in the bank here. Well, call it a bank. it's not much of a bank at this point. Once we get down into them trees there, it's all a lot more impressive and a lot more obvious. But where we've got this little gap, that's where we've just walked from. Just quickly pop through this little gap and have a look. Because from this side, the ground's a lot lower and the bank's a bit more bankish. There you go. As far as I can tell, having walked along there in the past, there isn't anything in the way of a ditch. Not that you can see anymore anyway. Just that bank of gorse. Now, continuing down into there, that's a lot better to look at. Now I'm following badger tracks here. I've come down off of the main path that runs along the top of the bank, the mound, and I've come down into the ditch, which is not all that accessible without breaking through a load of bracken, but the badgers are using it. They've got sets all over the place down here. It's like a proper little badger city. But I've just come down there off the top of the mound, down through the bracken, and if I look back there, that's the ditch going off behind me, and I'm going to go forward that way, and you should get a good idea of being down in the ditch with the bank up to our right. There's the bank running along next to us. And just over there's a big spoil heap, obviously a badger set. Quite nice and shady down here. There's another little badger pathway coming through there. There seems to be absolutely loads of them here. Right, let's see how far we can get before we have to climb back up onto the mound. Oh yeah. Oh, smelly. Badger toilet nearby somewhere. Quite good fun crawling my way through these badger tracks. It's where it comes in quite handy being such a short arse. They're absolutely everywhere, look. Oh, that was getting thick down there. I fought my way out and climbed up the bank. Let's have a slightly easier walk along the top for a bit. I love having a stick when you've got all this stuff to contend with. Nice little badger highway coming through there, look. Down along there. And up into all those sets where they've been doing a lot more digging. This is a really good spot to just get a good view of what typically Grimm's Ditch tends to look like along this stretch. You've got the ditch along here, look. And then up there's the mound. Not a massive mound. Part of the reason why they're not generally considered to be of a defensive nature. They're not really big enough. And they're generally in the wrong sort of places. The Grimm's ditches that are all over the country, they're all where you've got a linear earthwork of some sort, with or without a ditch next to it. And when you look at it on the map, it's all marked on the OS maps. It doesn't make a lot of sense. There's gaps in it all over the place, and it's reckoned that it's always been that way. Grimm's Ditch, despite running for, you know, hundreds of miles in some parts of the country, it's got great big gaps in it. This is a typical example of what's left around this area. We'll never know what it was for. Never. Not until somebody invents time travel and we can actually go back and see what was going on here all those thousands of years ago. Other than that, it's going to be a mystery forever. Best off just left to the badgers. At least they're making use of it. Sweating like a pig. Got a nice shady walk through the trees back to the car, and we'll make our way over to the next section, which is also wooded, thankfully. Oh, which way is it, Stick? That way. See, told you it works. Okay, so we're just west of a tiny little village, might even be a hamlet, called St Leonards. We're about 4 or 5 miles away from where we just were, over at Wigginton. And in here you've got some really, really nice bits of Grimm's Ditch. There's been a lot of forestry work going on around here. There was last time I was here. I'm not sure what it's all in aid of, but hopefully it's good for the trees. It's only just ever so slightly off the footpath. That's a bit more of a mound, isn't it? And a very clear ditch. Let's get down in the ditch. There we go, look, it comes to an abrupt end at the road just there. The road's literally just there, so it does make me wonder if originally it extended further in that direction. Now this, you almost could put down to being defensive, couldn't you? Can you imagine if you had your little homestead up there on the slightly higher ground and you were expecting people to attack from this direction? This would be a reasonable bit of defence around your house, wouldn't it? But there are so many other bits of Grimm's Ditch that just do not lend themselves to being defensive in any way whatsoever. And some people reckon that it was a boundary marker, or at least, you know, a series of boundary markers for different tribes, different families, different villages. Badgers here too, look. And yeah, I suppose that's a reasonable explanation. We're up the top here now, look, it's quite big. Boundary markers is a reasonable explanation, but again, when you look at the map and you see all the different bits of Grimm's Ditch and where they are and what shape they are, it's very confusing. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, I love this place. It's a really, really good example of Grimm's Ditch. Look at that, clear as anything. Running all the way along down there. I wish you could smell this moss. It smells absolutely lovely. I don't mind admitting it's getting proper hot now. It's about 11:30 in the morning, so it's really starting to heat up. I'm going to keep the walking to a minimum, I think, for my own self-preservation. Now, just sat down here for a little bit of a rest in the shade. There is one theory as to what Grimm's Ditch is, which I really like. It sort of ties in, it makes a little bit more sense than some of the other suggestions. Not a whole lot, but a little bit more. Down Stonehenge Way, where you know, the latest thinking is that Stonehenge was part of a huge sacred ritual landscape, including Woodhenge and Durrington walls and all these other monuments around there. That they were all part of a much larger combined landscape that was used for ritual purposes, involving the seasons and all those things which just come screaming at you as soon as you look at places like Stonehenge. One thought is that Grim's Ditch is something along the lines of that. They reckon it might have possibly... One suggestion is, which I also don't like, is that it was used for penning in livestock. And they say that about causewayed enclosures as well. That's just, that doesn't work for me at all. You wouldn't go to that much effort just to pen in cattle. There are easier ways to do it. But there are certain parts of Grim's Ditch where you've got these long straight areas such as I'm sitting on at the moment, and then at the end of it there'll be a little nook or a little right angle piece, which you can imagine if people were trying to herd animals, you'd have the mound all across one side of where you're trying to go, and then when they get to the end they're either slowed down or trapped by whatever you've built at the end there. And they reckon that this was quite possibly not a form of hunting, but a ritual process, some sort of, whatever sort of religion they might have followed back then, you know, some sort of appeasement to the gods or whatever. So when you look at the layout of Grim's Ditch and you've got all these funny little nooks and crannies, and it starts and it stops and then there's nothing for 10 miles and then you've got another bit, it can get really confusing. There doesn't, from our modern mindset, there just doesn't seem to be any logical purpose for it. Which is another reason I think if you go back to whatever sort of religious thoughts maybe they were having at the time, maybe that's a better way of explaining what it's all about. I mean, if you look at Stonehenge and that whole area, you've got all of these procession ways going on which are being uncovered and discovered all the time. They do include similar structures to Grim's Ditch. Makes you wonder. I certainly prefer that to the idea that it was a boundary marker. I mean, come on. I'll tell you what, I could quite easily doze off here. It's lovely. I don't know if you can hear it, but the air is thick with buzzing insects at the moment, which is good to see because we all know they're in trouble. Can you hear it? Probably not. When I've had my little sit down, we're going to go on a little drive. I've got a feeling it might be a good 10 or 15 miles-ish. Down to an area getting towards Prince's Risborough that I don't know at all. I've never been there before. But just looking at the map, I showed you at the beginning of the video, I found this little right-angled section of Grim's Ditch, and it's a large section too. A large unbroken section in this half a square shape, which is unusual, you know. I've got to go and see what's going on there. See if it can give me any clue as to the purpose of Grim's Ditch being such a specific shape. It makes me wonder that maybe if possibly it is sitting at the top of a little bit of a cliff, possibly, then it could be defensive, couldn't it? And see what else is in the area as well. When I get there, I'm going to have a closer look at the map and see what there is in the way of burial mounds, motte baileys, whatever else, you know, see what's going on. I'm just intrigued to go and see. On the way down there, we're going to be possibly driving through an area near Wendover, where the HS2 protest camp is set up. I'm not going to stop and do any filming there. It's very depressing. I've driven through there a few times and it is very, very depressing to see what's gone on there. They've destroyed a whole section of Grim's Ditch. There was no protection for it whatsoever. This little bit of Grim's Ditch just bulldozed for the trains. And the other terrible thing that's gone on there, there's a little wood there, a bit of ancient woodland called Jones Hill Wood. Much the same, I would imagine, as what I'm sitting in here. This doesn't look particularly ancient, but you know, same sort of area, same sort of species. What they've got in there is what are the bats called? They're called barbistrel bats. They've got these bats in there, and they've just bulldozed the entire wood. Now HS2's reasoning is, oh well, we've put up a few bat boxes, so you know that's all right, surely. Well, it's not at all. These particular bats are known for only nesting in very, very specific types of holes in certain trees. They're not going to go anywhere near bat boxes. Initially, HS2, the company behind the project, just started knocking the trees down without any permission whatsoever. Things were looking up at one point because they were stopped. A High Court said, no, you haven't got the relevant licences to be destroying bat habitat. And they had to stop. As a result, the government just handed HS2 all the relevant licences they needed to do whatever they want to the bats. So there you go, the protection that is in place stands for nothing when there's enough money involved, because the government will just hand them the licences anyway. The backhanders have already been paid a long time ago. This project has got to happen. They're not going to lose that money. It's a real shame. I think, as it stands, I think it's happened. It has happened. It's all gone now. It's been demolished. They put these bat boxes around the local area, but the barber bats aren't going to use them. Certain other bats might do, possibly. There are quite a few species in those woods. But not the barber poor little blighters are done for. How's this for an ancient hollow way? Nice. Well, I appear to have found the place. I just need to head north-northeast and we should have our spot. According to the OS map, Grimm's Ditch should be directly to my left here, parallel to the track, but I'm not seeing anything yet. Let's keep going. Can I see just over there? Hold on. Is that a linear mound? Or is it just shadows? It's too hot for me to go too far off the track. I'm fading. If I carry on this path with the mound over there to my left, the linear earthwork, I should come to the crook, the corner bit. I should hit it coming across the pathway, or at least the pathway should go through it. So I'm going to do that. Let's keep this easy. Okay, I found it. It's here. This is where the pathway crosses. Well, that pathway goes all the way across. This pathway actually stops there. So that might well have been the mound that I could see off in the left, because here you can just make out a Grimm's Ditch. It's not great. I was hoping it might be a big impressive example, but it's not really. You can sort of, it's a bit like we saw at Wigington, the first section we saw at Wigington with all the gorse on it. There is a rough mound in there, and there's a bit of a depression on this side, but maybe in the winter you might get a better idea. It looks as though it's now a plantation. Somebody's growing some nice straight wood there. Right, so theoretically, if I take a little wander in this direction, we just came from there. If I take a little wander down here, we might find the side section of it and see if we can actually pop ourselves right in that corner, right in the corner of Grimm's Ditch, and see what we can see. Probably not much. Okay, I've had a little look around, and the only discernible lump that I can see that might be Grimm's Ditch is this it's along here. If you look down this line through all these hedges, look, there is a very definite mound there, and there is a slight depression on that side running alongside it. I think that must be it. There's bugger all left, is there really? Oh, at least I came to see it. But now that I've found that, and I also know that the east to west bit of Grimm's Ditch is running along in there, we could say that, let's see, follow that line, goes up to there. Let's go and plonk ourselves right in the corner of Grimm's Ditch. I think this is the spot. Just here. Wow. Oh, who's that just flying over conveniently? Lovely. That's not a kite, I think that one's a buzzard. Perfect. Oh, cheers, Grimsditch. Anyway, right. So this tree here, this little corner here, this is pretty much where the north-south and the east-west met. I made that funny little corner of Grimsditch. Now this is a modern plantation, clearly. So, I don't know what would have been here at the time, but if we look out from this corner of Grimsditch, I'm not sure. There's so many trees in the way. Are we on a bit of high ground here? Is this a lookout point? Could it be defensive in any way? I'm going to have to check the map. Right, it's getting so hot. I'm going to make my way back to the car and we'll have a quick look on the OS and see if we can figure out what the elevation is here. See how it sits within the landscape. God, that buzzard was good, wasn't it? Oh, me stick. So where did that name Grimsditch come from then? Well, you've got Grimsditches all over the country, and they probably all served different purposes originally. But the name Grim is almost certainly a reference to Odin. You know, the king of the Norse gods. He would take human form from time to time and come and wander around on the earth and sort of test humanity. Like all the old religions have that. It's a common one. They have tales. Even Jesus, you know, you could consider that Jesus was like God who took a human form and came down to interact with mankind. Well, when Odin did it, he took the name Grim. And he was an old one-eyed traveller looking for refuge, looking for somewhere to stay the night. And it was well known back then that if you had a knock at the door in the middle of the night and you had a one-eyed old traveller with a raven on each shoulder looking for somewhere to sleep, you'd better say yes and you'd better offer him a decent meal because it might just be Odin. It was a really well-known tale. You could have been Cain from Kensworth, or you could have been Aidwulf from Edlesborough, or you could have been Tood from Toddington. All these people with their little settlements back then, they'd have known about that tale. And it still continues to this day, doesn't it? In various forms. A very old story. But the reason these earthworks ended up with the name Grimsditch was because by the time Christianity came along, Grimsditch was already pretty old. The story of where it had come from had already been lost to the ages, sort of thing. Or by then it was already a mystery. And like a lot of things like that, all these funny old mysteries, anything that was connected to folk tales or paganism or... I'll use my stick, that's handy. Anything like that, they'd associate it with the devil to put people off having anything to do with it. So, you know, obviously the devil was put across as all sorts of things back in them days, and Odin was one of them. Grim. He was sort of one of the many faces of the devil, according to those guys. Whew, I've stopped in the hottest place ever. And keep walking. Nearly there. Nice woods. They don't seem very heavily used. Nice quiet place. I think I can see the road down there. Okay, so looking at the map, here's Grimsditch, where we just were, and I went and stood right up in that top corner there. and we couldn't see what the landscape was like. But looking at the map there, you can see the elevation lines. It is sitting at the top of a hill. So maybe that particular bit of Grimm's Ditch did serve a defensive purpose. Who knows? Very odd. That's Grimm's Ditch all over though. Very odd. Nobody really knows what it's for. It's bloody huge. I'm done in. I'm going home. See you later.